Welcome to Shattered the Podcast.
Sharing the lived experience of mental illness on
a father,
a mother,
A family.
let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
Let's go.
G'day and welcome to Shattered the Podcast for another week. I am your host, I'm Mark. G'day. I do hope that you are having a good day. Today we are talking about, does it take courage to ask for help with mental illness and why? Yes, and yes. It absolutely takes courage to ask for help with a mental illness for many, many reasons. And we're going to go into 4 of those reasons today. Alrighty, so let's talk about the fact that you may have a mental illness. You've noticed something about yourself that is off. Something is not right. Some people are born with mental illness and it can be extremely tough for them because they don't really understand what it's like to feel different. So I was speaking to a person that had bipolar disorder the other day. They thought that their head was normal and everybody else's was not. They wondered what it would be like to live in somebody else's head, to understand what it's like to not live with their bipolar disorder. They assumed that everybody felt like them. They assumed that everybody struggled with their mental health as much as they did. And even defining an issue as a mental health problem can be a tough thing to do. You know, we all know what it's like to get sad. We all know what it's like to feel different, unaccepted, outcast. We all know what it feels like. We've all had that a little bit in our lives. And if you watch TV and anything else, you know that that seems to be an integral part of life. This feeling that you are other and separate and apart. So if we're taught that that is our natural state, when you have a mental illness, it's hard to define that something is actually wrong with you. It can be. For me, I was fortunate. One day my mind was healthy. That afternoon, it wasn't anymore. My behavior had changed so dramatically that it was easy to see that something traumatic had happened and it had altered my behavior in significant ways. So there's 4 reasons why people will not or won't ask for help. And it's overcoming these things is where courage comes in. I was at a school the other week and a kid asked me, they said, how hard was it for you to talk to people about your mental illness? And I delved into it a little bit with him and he was just saying, well, I just can't understand why and how you figure out that you've got a mental illness. What if I am just feeling a bit sad? And I said, well, what's the worst that can happen? If you go to somebody that you love and you trust and you say, look, I am really not feeling good in my head and I don't know what is going on, it might be that you just haven't had enough vitamin D. You know, you might go to your GP, your general practitioner, your doctor, and just say, mate, I've been feeling a bit off. Okay, cool. Well, let's talk about what's bothering you. Let's do a blood test. Let's make sure that you're getting enough vitamins, you're getting enough fiber in your diet. The worst that can happen is that you'll find out that everything's okay. So for me, asking for help, from my perspective, should be an easy thing to do. But I do know that it's not. And why is it not easy? Why can't we just go, hey, I need to do a mental health checkup? Nobody does that. Nobody would do that because of many reasons. I'm going to go into 4 of them today. All right. So the first one, of course, is stigma. We all live in a society now where everybody's equal, everybody's the same, everybody has supposed to have equal opportunity. All the races, all the genders, all the sexualities, we're all good. Everybody's good. Probably the one group, yeah, No, I'm not even going to compare it because you can't. I mean, people suffering race problems, that's bigger than anything. But mental illness is just one of those things that people are prepared to tolerate intolerance with. What does that mean? As a society, we are willing to allow the stigma against people with mental illness to perpetuate. And that's a big claim. But watch television, watch a crime show, watch a crime documentary, watch a movie. Who are the bad guys now? Who are the people that are the protagonist, the evil villain? They're all mentally deranged in some way or fashion. Batman, all of his opponents, his villains, are people with mental illness. Can't tell me that the Joker is not mentally ill. The Riddler, Penguin, all of these guys, they're not criminals. They're psychotic criminals. Now, you wonder why I say that society is willing to allow this to happen? It's because new superheroes are coming out all the time. Most of their villains are people that have or are intimated to have mental deficiencies or illnesses. It's a subtle thing, but it's still there. Now, that's the thing about stigma and prejudice that we don't really understand, most of us, because we've never really been through it. I've never been through it. I'm the whitest white guy that's ever been white in white land. My ancestors are Irish. My wife's ancestors are Scottish. We're all Celtic. We're all white. Never suffered any kind of discrimination because I've never stood out. But during the pandemic, when I couldn't wear a mask, I felt so exposed. At times, I felt like I was living in a microscope. I wanted to run away. I wanted to hide. Every glance, every look that people gave me, every comment was degrading and humiliating because as soon as they ask why I'm not wearing a mask, I have to tell them that I've got a mental illness. I didn't understand prejudice before that. But the problem was that after a while, I just stopped seeing it. I chose not to see it. I chose to allow myself to be confident in the fact that I had a medical exemption from wearing a mask. So I didn't think about it anymore. I didn't walk around thinking I had a target on my back. However, when I was with my family, they did, because they didn't walk around with me in public as much as I did with myself. Kind of makes sense when you think about it. But when they were with me, they saw the things that I saw. And to an extent, they became paranoid the same way that I did. And I didn't understand why a person feels stigmatized and victimized when they are a little bit different. I've got a friend that is transitioning from female to male, and I'm always thrown when they talk about the fact that people are staring at them because they've now got short hair. Now, I spoke to another person who is non-binary, and I asked them about it. I said, how much of that is her perception of people staring at her, and how much of it is actually real people staring at him because he now has short hair. And I loved what she said. She said, look, that's a very, very interesting and valid question, because you get the persecution complex. I'm transitioning from female to male, so I don't look how I used to, but you think every stranger in the world is looking at you. Well, they're not. They don't know, for the most part, that you're transitioning. And if they do, they think you're a young woman that wants to have short hair. Nobody cares anymore. But at what point does it start to become an issue? And my non-binary friend, I love how open and honest they are, about their transition, realizing that some people will understand it and some people won't. And I mean, that's fantastic. I love that. But when you're walking around with a mental illness, you can fall into the same trap of thinking that people are thinking things that they're actually not. It's a self-stigma. It's an idea that I am now different and everybody knows it, even if they don't know. Is sort of thing, if I converted to Judaism, unless I told you about it, you wouldn't know. But would I then feel all the anti-Semitic um, insults and stuff going around? Maybe. But at what point are we choosing to allow society to stigmatize us? And at what point are we accepting that stigma and wearing it? Is offense a choice? Can we choose not to be offended? I think we can. So, what's stopping a person reaching out for help with their mental illness is that stigma. It's that idea that everybody is going to know that I am different if I acknowledge this, and society as a whole is negative when it comes to mental illness. Just for curiosity, I don't watch these shows all the time, but I watched a couple of shows on two different American serial killers, and I'm not going to name them because they suck and I don't want to. But I'm stunned at how fast they went for the uh, mental illness acquittal. I'm not. I have a mental illness, so I'm not competent to be charged. Going the mental illness defense. How fast people went there. How fast people were willing to go. The only reason that these guys could do this extreme behaviors is because something was wrong with them. They were mentally ill. Now, were they not? I don't know. I'm not in their heads, but that's the message that people are getting. So you've got the quiet voices in the corner going, "Hey, I have a mental illness and I do have a mental illness." And hopefully you will see me exactly the same way as you see someone else. But then you've got this massive loud voice out there screaming how bad it is to have a mental illness and how dangerous people are with a mental illness. That's the societal stigma. Then you get the personal stigma, the self stigma, the idea that I am not who I wanted to be. That phrase, be all that you can be. I've always thought about that. And I like it. I mean, it's a good advertising campaign that the Army came up with, American Army. Be all that you can be. We like to see ourselves as having unlimited potential. So when you find out or realize or think that you might have a mental illness, you know that you are not being all you can be. And that hurts. It sucks. It's the kind of thing that will destroy a person if they dwell on it. Self stigma is the most evil thing that's out there, and it's so completely unnecessary. But it will still keep happening until we as a society decide that being mentally ill does not mean that you are broken, deficient, or dangerous. Oh, that's a big one. Okay. Second reason that people will often take to not talk about their mental illness is the fear of what will happen. Now, this is different from stigma because stigma is a choice that I have to view something in a certain way. Fear is about the unknown. If I talk about this mental illness, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to me? Am I going to be locked away? Am I going to be put in a psych ward? Am I going to have to wear a straitjacket? Are they going to put electrodes on my head? Am I going to have drugs for the rest of my life? What is going to happen if I admit it? What will happen to my family? What will happen to my friends? I was listening to a story in the school the other day where a woman was talking about how she struggled with mental illness for her entire life. She got married, had a couple of kids, was seemingly having the perfect life, but she was struggling with mental illness, severe mental illness. She had to be admitted to hospital, to a psych ward. Anyway, her kids came in to see her one day and they were really excited because they had new neighbors across the street and they had two kids and they were just their kids' age. They were going to go to school together. They lived across the road from each other. It's every kid's dream to have a peer living in your street. That was fantastic when I was a kid. It was for her kids as well. It was for my kids. She comes home from hospital and the woman finds out that she was in hospital because she had a mental illness. She then made sure that the kids never played together again. She was afraid of the person with mental illness. Afraid of what? I don't know. Afraid that she was going to kill and chop up her children? I don't know. Afraid that the kids might catch it? Afraid that she was dangerous? It was irrational and it was irresponsible and it left a scar. Why wouldn't you be afraid of something like that happening? You're already vulnerable. You've already got a mental illness. And then there's a chance that horrible things are going to happen to you. People are going to see you in different ways because you have that mental illness. The third problem that people face is figuring out whether their mental illness is going to define them. And it actually ties in with our fourth point, but I'll get into that in a sec. Will it define me? If I admit or find out or discover or am diagnosed with a mental illness, is that who I am now? Is that going to be the rest of my life? Is the sum of my life experience on my tombstone? Are they going to have to say, if she hadn't had mental illness, she could have done good things? Is her life now defined by an illness? Now, some illnesses do define us. Some injuries define us. Somebody living in a wheelchair. Of course, they are more than the wheelchair, but they have to admit that they live in a wheelchair. They have to admit that they're not walking around like the rest of everybody else. They have to admit that they're a little bit different. But do we now get mad at people who in wheelchairs because of the inconvenience of, oh, I've got to put a ramp in now so you can get up the damn stairs? Why have I got to change everything to facilitate your needs? No, we don't get angry at people with wheelchairs, but I do know because I used to push a lot of people around back in the 80s and 90s. People would get mad if you got in the way, if a wheelchair got a flat tire and you held somebody up for like 30 seconds while you tried to fix it. People got mad. Nowadays, it would never happen. And that's what I'm advocating for people with a mental illness. When people understand that there is an issue, they will be more forgiving. But still, the stigma remains around, will it define me? Is this going to be how people see me? Is this how I have to describe myself to employers? Is this what I'm going to have to put on a caveat on every friendship that I ever have? It's a fear. And it's in some ways legitimate. Shouldn't be. And it's not. But even I, in certain circumstances, will not mention to people that I have a mental illness. And I podcast about it. I go into schools and talk about it. I go into workplaces and talk about it. But there are still times where I do not want people to know that I have a mental illness because of what might be said, because of what people might do, because of how it might affect my opportunities in that circumstance. The fourth and final point for today that I have is that people who are concerned about asking for help with their mental illness are concerned that what they have is not really real. And if they ignore it, it'll just go away. I tell my story quite graphically in schools, but I also tell the story of my younger brother, who is a veteran of Afghanistan, came back after 4 tours, got the PTSD. Kids listen to my story and they think, oh, I could never survive what you've been through. That was amazing. I say the same thing to my brother. I could never have done what he did. He is amazing. He is incredible. And he deserves to have PTSD. My PTSD came from being beaten up by people with disabilities and acquired brain injury. His came from being in a war zone. In each of our cases, we had to speak up. We had to talk about it. We couldn't ignore it. We couldn't just wait for it to go away. We couldn't just fake our way through it until everything was fine. Both of us reached points where our families were on the precipice. Our marriages were about to fail because we were faking it till we made it. We were saying, I will just keep pushing through because one day, maybe, it will get better, and it won't. It wouldn't. It doesn't. Mental illness is an injury. It's a pain. It's something that the chemicals in your brain have been altered. It's a physiological illness. You can't just get over it. You can't just move on from it. Now, I've listed the 4 possible reasons, and I'm sure there's many, many more that you can think of reasons why it's difficult for people to talk about the fact that they might have a mental illness. The truth of it is that it takes so much courage for a person to discuss openly, honestly, their mental illness. It takes courage to overcome all of the points that I've just mentioned. The stigma, the fear, the will it define you? Can I just ignore it and it'll go away? Some people think that ignoring something, ignoring the pain, you see it on a football field. Guy gets his shoulder dislocated. Just pop it back in. I can keep playing. We think that ignoring mental illness is the same sort of thing. You can just shrug it off. And the courage it takes for a person to leap into this world of the unknown, this world of psychologists and psychiatrists and medication and stigma and movies and crime shows and TVs about how damaged and broken and dangerous people with mental illness are. It takes courage to be able to admit to yourself that you aren't doing great, that things are out of whack, that I am not the best me that I could be. The courage to admit to another person. At my work, we were talking about how to have a discussion with somebody that comes to you and says, I've got I think I'm struggling with mental illness. And what do you say to that person? And people were saying all sorts of things. Oh, encourage them, ask them to get help. The first thing, and I said this in this meeting and it kind of blew a few people's minds. So the first thing I would say is thank you to the person that's talking to me, because I know how hard it is to do that. We go into schools and we talk to kids about mental illness, have kids come up to us afterwards and just say, man, I'm going to go talk to somebody today because you told me the story of why it's so important. Said I would never have had the courage to do that. Thank you for coming in. What I always do, and like I said, I mentioned it in this meeting, the first thing that you should do is say thank you. Thank you for trusting me. Thank you for having the courage to speak out, because it is courage. My brother and I, growing up, would have thought that it took courage to push your feelings down. Not because my dad was an egoist or a misogynist or a men's rights dude. It's just he grew up in the bush, in the country. Men were men. Men dealt with their issues. It wouldn't have made sense to him to do anything but fake it till he made it. And that's the environment that my brother and I grew up in. But when we faced legitimate mental health crises brought on by trauma, we weren't going to be able to just get over it and move on. We had to deal with it. We had to address it. When somebody comes to you and they say, look, I feel I'm struggling mentally, what would your gut reaction be? What would your gut reaction tell you to say and do in that instance? Are you going to see that person as weak? I worked with people with disabilities and acquired brain injuries for a number of years, 18 years. I was a behavioral medic. I was a behavioral. Wow, struggling with this word. I helped people work with people with negative behaviors. I was a behavioral management specialist. There you go. Brain fart cleared up. And that just basically meant that when somebody had extreme negative behaviors, me or somebody from my team would go in, do a comprehensive evaluation of the client, and then build a strategy on how to work with that client so that it would diminish the violence that they displayed. Manage their behavior by teaching the staff and the client better ways to communicate, better ways than violence. And it was a violent workplace. We got hit, kicked, bitten, cut, abused physically and verbally by disabled clients, some of whom were very, very big and very, very strong. But I was defined. A 12-year-old girl took a chunk out of my arm, little autistic kid. Just my arm was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She just latched onto it, took a chunk out of my arm. We never used to talk about our mental health. We never used to talk about mental illness and whether we were struggling. We were so focused on the clients. And we made fun of the people that didn't make the grade. If we had a staff member that just didn't show up, we wouldn't be mean to them, but we would laugh about their situation. We would make jokes about it. And I'm ashamed of that. I'm truly ashamed that that was our attitude. When as a matter of fact, we should have been thanking them for their courage. Because for me, continuing in that world, maintaining the amount of physical, verbal abuse that I was facing on a day-to-day basis to help people was destroying me. I am grateful that my brother, a veteran, he is my hero. He's not a hero because he went overseas and won a medal. He didn't. He went overseas and he did his job. And then he came home with an injury that people couldn't see. And he admitted to it and he talked about it and he got help. My brother is my hero. I am incredibly proud of his service in the military, but I am more proud of how he has dealt with the psychological injury that he suffered in wartime. We need to try to find ways to acknowledge the courage of people that are willing to ask for help. We need to facilitate the opportunity for people to talk about the fact that they might be struggling with their mental health. And of course, this podcast is not going to be able to fix that problem. But maybe, just maybe, you listening, me talking, other people talking, other people listening, start to break down those barriers, make it easier for people to put their hand up and say, you know what, I am not feeling good today. My mental health is a little bit lax. Fine, mate, just you go and get yourself sorted out. We'll see you when you come back. That is my dream. That is my hope. If somebody does talk to you about their mental illness, make sure you thank them. Make sure you tell them that you appreciate the courage it took. And if you're listening to this going, Mark, I can't talk about my mental illness, that means I'm a coward. No, it doesn't. Cowardice is not feeling fear. Cowardice is letting the fear control you. If you are struggling, if you are hurting, you may not even know what's going on. Please be courageous. Please know that people would recognize how courageous you are being by asking for help. Doesn't take courage to be quiet. Doesn't take courage to disagree privately. It takes courage to speak out. It takes courage to act and try to make things better. If you're struggling and you have asked for help, well done. You're amazing. I know how hard it is. Be encouraged. Be brave. Don't allow fear and stigma and self-pity stop you from trying to get better. And if you know somebody in your life, maybe they have been struggling with mental health, maybe you haven't been as supportive as you can, it's never too late. It's never too late to just say, hey, I made a mistake. How do I support you from now on? A woman that I used to work with used to blow up in the office all the time. It was ridiculous. Standing on the outside looking at it, it just looked like it wasn't that she was unhinged, it was just that she was nasty. And she got mad at the drop of a hat. Being her superior, I had to take her aside. And thankfully, I didn't react the way that my gut wanted to. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Pull your head out of your ass. Just do your job. Stop being mean to people. I asked the question. I said, "What's going on with you?" And they told me, "Mate, I've been struggling with this thing. It's hurting me, and I feel trapped, and I don't know what to do about it." And I just said, "Well, why don't we organise some time off for you, and you can go chat to a doctor about it." "Oh, you don't talk to a doctor about being angry?" I said, yeah, you do. You do. And then looking at the behavior from a new viewpoint, you could just see that this woman was in pain. It kept coming out as anger or frustration. And at times I did react poorly to it. Like, why can't you just do your job? But as soon as I found out that there was something wrong there, didn't forgive all sins, but it made it possible for people to go, okay, let's give her the benefit of the doubt. And I didn't announce to the team that she had mental illness. I just said, look, she's struggling with some issues and we need to be patient. And we put in a number of things. We moved her to a more private work area where she didn't feel exposed. We made sure that she only had one boss. How many workplaces do you work in and you feel like you've got 8 bosses because everybody's got 2 cents to say about your job? We were just like, hey, if you've got a difficulty with this person's work, you come and speak to me. And it made all the difference. And that difference was made because she had the courage to stand up and say, you know what? My behavior hasn't been great. And this is not an excuse, but it's an explanation. And that explanation was perfectly valid. I'll finish off by just saying, have courage, be brave. Have the courage to listen to somebody. You're never going to be able to fix them, but you can say, mate, I love you. I support you. I don't see you any differently, but I think you need to go and talk to somebody professionally. How hard is that? And yet, it does take courage. Be courageous. Have a great week. Remember, you can check out Shattered the Podcast on Facebook, YouTube. It's on all of the iTunes. It's on Anchor. It's on all of the podcast databases. And of course, it's also on the Wisdom app. I want to thank everybody on Wisdom that's been listening today. Appreciate it. Have a great day. I'll speak to you again on Wednesday when we have marriage and mental illness with my beautiful wife, Mary. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to Shattered the Podcast. I'd like to thank our producer, Meredith Brosnan, our executive producer, Torian Lau, and the band Adelaide for allowing us to use their song as our theme. Go to shatteredthepodcast.com for more information.